Okay, the recording has started. Welcome to the September 8th edition of the study hall. Today's topic's been requested by a few people over the past few months. Draw the conclusion type questions in CR, and we've got a few examples from GMAT Prep to go along with that. We're going to start with the usual warnings. If you guys have been to these study halls before, you'll know how they work. But the warnings are a little bit more important because a lot of the submissions in the last couple of weeks have been in violation of these usual warnings. So let's just make sure we're on the same page with this. No problems that are too general. Basically, you can't give us a problem that is asking about the entire GMAT at once. So you can't say something like, how do I solve problems faster? Because you're effectively asking us about all problems at the same time. There's thousands of pages of material and hundreds of lectures and things like that because the test is so broad. So you can't realistically ask us for all that at once. Also, please don't submit problems that are too specific. A lot of you guys have been doing this in the last couple of weeks. So let me just illustrate with a couple of problems that people have posted in the last couple of weeks. So the principle again here is please guys don't submit problems that are too specific, because that's why we have a forum online. The purpose of our forum is to address super specific problems. So here's an illustration of a submission like this from the last week. Someone's got this giant post where they put a whole critical reasoning problem in there, like this. It'll show up on your screen in just a second. This is the kind of question that you shouldn't submit to the study hall because it's way too specific. What you should do is you should submit this kind of problem on the forum. So there's a lot of words here, but notice the individual who posted this has written, I have a question about choice E, and ironically, this person even quoted the forum thread. So, guys, if you're asking a question about one problem and one answer choice, please post this question on the forum. Not here, not in the study hall. And there's a little bit of irony here because this post actually has a forum thread quoted in it. But again, the study hall is not the place for super specific questions like this. The study hall is meant for general themes so that we can have some sort of continuity for each class session, etc. So there are quite a few of these posts from the last month or two. If it's super specific and there's not a tie-in to a more general idea, then guys, please post on the forum. The other thing also, remember the context of these study halls. These are watched by hundreds of people. I think some of our recordings have been watched by thousands of people. So another thing that's just inappropriate to cover for that reason is personal issues. So, remember, there's going to be 1,000 people watching these lectures. So please don't submit your own scores and study plan and things like that. So here's another individual from, in fact, just the day before yesterday. So again, the point is don't submit your personal issues and study plans and so on. And here's another post from the last couple of weeks, from the day before yesterday, actually. This individual is saying, I finished one of your prep tests and I bombed in geometry and verbal. Can you look at my assessment report and tell me these things? a couple of things about this. I mean, first of all, this is an individual study plan issue, so it's not the kind of content that we want to use on the study hall. But also, we do have a general questions folder for this sort of thing. It's on the forum. It's the very first folder on the forum. In fact, I can just give you guys a quick screenshot of the forum folders and show you where that is. Okay, it's the very, very first folder actually on the entire forum. So this is where you should post these things. It's the wrong graphic. Okay, you should post them here. General GMAT strategy questions. So general, when we say the general folder, this is what we mean. Study plan questions go here. Also, as a further guideline, a couple of people have submitted things like this recently, which is why we're addressing it. But a couple of people have submitted things like this where they've asked us, you know, can you look at my data and things like that. When you post on the forum, please provide a summary of your data with all relevant breakdowns and so on. Because one thing that we can't realistically do on a forum is go into our software and look up individual students' data. I mean, that's where it sort of blurs the line between private tutoring and forums. We do, if you take our 9-session course, we do offer a feedback as part of that course in which your instructor will go into your data on the site and do a formal analysis of it like this. But when you post to the forum, make sure that you're posting a question that can be readily answered from what you have written. In other words, if you're going to post something that requires in-depth research into your own test data, that's more of a class or tutoring type of thing. But again, make sure you guys understand these two main rules here. The first rule, I mean, worth spending a little bit more time on today because people are breaking these rules more often these days, apparently. So don't submit things that are super duper specific like that. And again, please don't submit personal study plan things on the forum. Smiley face icon over there on the left if this stuff makes sense. Okay, so what do we want to see? What we want to see is some sort of general medium length idea, as we said here. So one from a while ago, a person asked about the median and statistics questions, so that became the topic of a later lecture. And then also there's specific questions that tie into a more general question. So it's okay to do this, but only if you have some sort of more general question that addresses the topic. So for instance, a person asked about a which modifier. Last time the topic was which modifiers. There was a student who posted a question a lot like this one, but then they said, I'd like help on these which modifiers in general. I don't know whether they just modify the noun or the whole phrase before the comma. And so that was a good tie-in. There's a question about these things in general. So like same thing, I can't decide between these two choices. Could you present some other things on this or that type of modifier? Something needs to be a study hall topic here. That's the point. Finally, make sure you don't submit problems from the official guide. You can't. I mean, our website has now been updated so that it will reject you if you try. But some people are still trying. Remember, we cannot take OG problems either here or on the forum. In fact, by express request of GMAC, they've asked us, please not to use these. And then there's just a recap of what we said about single questions. Finally, there are, I think, 44 different study halls to date. That's a lot. So as you can imagine, we have already covered a lot of topics. So therefore, when you post a topic, what you should do is please check and make sure we have not already covered that topic. Because if we have, we really don't want to cover it again. So we try not to duplicate material on here. I mean, we may wind up eventually duplicating topics. I mean, if we do 100 study halls, I'm sure it's going to be impossible not to duplicate topics. But for now, we're trying to do fresh and new material. So when you post a topic, please endeavor to check that that topic has not been posted already. So, and if it has, please watch the lecture where it has been posted. And if you don't, if there's some aspect of the topic that hasn't been touched on, then tell us what. So, for example, we have a session on, let's say, coordinate geometry. We've got a couple of those, actually. But if there's some aspect of coordinate geometry that we haven't done, then go ahead and throw it at us and see what we can do. So, but please tell us what aspects were not in the original lecture so that we can hit that. Any questions, go ahead and type them in the text box. Smiley face if you guys are ready to start on some critical reasoning. Okay, let's get started. Again, today's theme is draw the conclusion or most strongly supported. And one more reminder, just to make sure we're all on the same page. You should see these, you're going to see them right now. You should see these answer buttons on the left part of your screen. They should be under the list of names. Smiley face if you see these guys. Okay, remember when we post problems, you got to answer them using these answer buttons. Please do not answer the questions in a text box for everyone to see. When you answer the question using these buttons, people will not see your response. So if any of you are shy about people seeing your response, first of all, remember this environment is anonymous in the first place. But second of all, no one's going to see it, so no sweat. All right, let's do it. And put a question on the board in just a second. That would be right here. Okay, here you go. Here's a question. Please use the answer buttons. And good luck. All right, guys. There's a lot of you without answers, so please pick something. Remember that this is the GMAT. You got to answer the problems. This is a test on. If any of you are new to the GMAT, make sure you know this. This is a test on which you absolutely have to answer all of the problems. So there's no option of not answering. That means you got to guess, even if you don't really have a clue what's going on here. So always answer every problem. Also, on this software, make sure you press the answer button once. Because if you press it again, it will erase your answer. So a lot of you without answers. Okay, so we're waiting on take about 10 more seconds there, and then we'll discuss. Okay, guys, there's still quite a few of you who haven't answered the problem, but a couple of you are marked away, so let's go ahead and discuss. Here are the class statistics. So people are definitely all over the place on this one. Interesting. Let's take a look. And along the way, we will learn a little bit about how these things work. So let's come back to Systems Magazine in a second. Let's start with a little diversion here into a different problem. That'll be this one. So load it onto the board in the next 5 seconds or so. That's this problem. I'll wait till you guys can see it. Smith has eaten at restaurant X 20 times this year, paying at least $50 per plate every time. 19 of those times, Smith has eaten seafood, paying an average of $75 per plate. So what I'm going to do is erase your answers, and I'm going to have you give me A, B, or C for this. So let's take the numbers away and put letters in there. So give me an A if your inference or conclusion is that Smith likes seafood and is willing to pay a premium for it. Give me a B if your inference or conclusion is Smith has eaten food other than seafood, at this restaurant. And give me a C if your conclusion is either of those two could be right. So go for it. Again, please use the answer buttons to do this. Sarah K., please don't answer in the text box. Please answer using your, thank you. Please answer using your answer button. Okay. Everybody give me something. Kevin, I don't know if you were a little bit late or something, but here's what we had to explain that on the previous slide. You should see these guys on another part of your screen, these answer button thingies. So use those. Also, just press once. I can see your answer, by the way, so you're good. Okay. Here are the class statistics for this problem. So a majority of those who answered did select the correct answer. There's still a bunch of non-responses. Remember, this is the GMAT. You have to answer the questions, guys. But this should be B. So let's make sure we talk about why. So what does inference mean? Let's make sure we talk about this. What does inference, or equivalently conclusion, mean on this test? Because in real life, the word inference or the word conclusion can... the problem with real life is that we don't generally use consistent definitions of words. I mean, even the simplest words, in real life, they often have many, many, many meanings. For instance, the word or in real life can sometimes mean A or B or both. But sometimes it can mean A or B, just one. And I mean, the point is that you have to use, in real life, you have to use like context to figure this out. So for instance, if you say, if the coffee shop person says, do you want cream or sugar, the implication is it can be cream or sugar, or it could be both. But if someone, if a cop says stop or I'll shoot, then obviously it's not stop or I'll shoot, or both. So the point is, or can mean different things depending on context. Same kind of thing with inference and conclusion. I mean, this word can mean different things depending on context. So yeah, Milan has it. But the point here is, in real life, the point here is that there's a whole spectrum of what that word can mean. I mean, it can mean you have to prove beyond any reasonable doubt. Or it can just mean you have some sort of vague hunch or idea that something is true. And in real life, the point is that you are all over this spectrum with what conclusion means. Like, for instance, if you say, oh, my friend has a girlfriend who has red hair, therefore he must like redheads a lot. People would call that a conclusion, but that's basically a wild guess. And there's not really a ton of evidence for that. On the other hand, on the other extreme, if you think about being in a courtroom, and if you think about the level of evidence that you have to have for something in a courtroom, then that's closer to the left side of the spectrum. So one thing about standardized tests, I mean, the most important thing about standardized tests is that they are standardized. And what that means is that words, I mean, among other things, what that means is that words have a consistent meaning on standardized tests. So conclusion on this test means basically what it means in a courtroom. It means that you have to prove stuff beyond any reasonable doubt. So on the GMAT, what draw a conclusion means is this. Conclusion and inference on the test mean this. They mean that you have to prove stuff beyond any reasonable doubt. It's not always going to be rigorous proof using, formal logic and things like that, but it will be proof beyond any reasonable doubt. So, I mean, if there are any objections, the idea is that those objections should just be plain unreasonable. So, let's look at the problem above. Smith has eaten at restaurant X 20 times, paying at least $50 a plate. 19 of those times, Smith has eaten seafood, paying an average of $75 a plate. So what do we know beyond any reasonable doubt? Well, choice A is problematic. I mean, Smith likes seafood. We don't really know that. There are a whole host of other reasons why Smith might be eating lots of seafood that might not have anything to do with personal taste. So, yeah, I mean, Steven says maybe it's a health thing. I mean, I personally eat chicken breasts all the time, even though I don't really like chicken breasts. But I eat them anyway because they're very good for the sort of diet that I eat. Could be religious. Maybe Smith doesn't eat meat on certain days and eats seafood instead. Like a lot of Catholics eat fish on Friday. Maybe restaurant X is a seafood restaurant and only has other food on special occasions. The point is there's a whole lot of reasons that are perfectly reasonable why Smith might be eating so much seafood besides Smith likes seafood. So this is not proved beyond any, there are plenty of reasonable doubts here. And then the other problem with premium is the same thing, because premium means more than Smith pays for other things. Like premium is not just a high price. Premium is more than others. So we don't know this either, because we don't know how much Smith pays for other food. I mean, it's over 50 on average. Seafood is 75, but that still allows cases where other food costs even more. So we don't know this either. So A is, I mean, choice A is this kind of thing on the right of our spectrum here, where it's just a vague hunch. Choice A is one of these. So what's difficult about these for a lot of people is that they're not making this enough. They're not making this specific enough in their head. Like, what does the conclusion mean on this test? So you're looking for the left-hand side of the spectrum. Choice B is the left-hand side of the spectrum, because notice that Smith has eaten at this restaurant 20 times, and 19 of those were seafood. So that 19 minus 20 is not 0. So that other time, there must have, and Smith has, it's not just Smith has been there, Smith has actually eaten 20 times. So there was at least once where Smith ate something that wasn't seafood. So we know this. It's not a particularly interesting statement. I mean, it's kind of boring, to be honest, but it's there. It works. And you can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. So B. Give me the smiley face if this makes sense to you guys. Okay. So the other thing about this is that what I'm doing here, I mean, I just made this problem up for my classes. But the other point that I want to illustrate is that doing this is an excellent way to measure your knowledge on this test. Like, you should be able to make up, you may not have to make 5 answer choices, but you should be able to make up simple problems that, so simple problems of each problem type. And if you can't, then you don't understand the problem type. Because, I mean, a lot of people have this bad habit where they seem to just be, you know, it's a very passive style of learning. Like, they're just like, here, give me this, give me this, give me this, and I'll solve it. What you want to do is involve yourself a little bit more in the learning process and try to make things that are your own. That doesn't mean take their problems and change them up a little bit. It means make your own. So, like, I made this as an illustration of inference or draw a conclusion type problems, and you should be able to do the same kind of thing. Like, you don't have to write an elaborate paragraph of the way in the way the GMAC does. But if you can't write your own draw the conclusion problem at all, then that means there's a certain lack of understanding there. So anyway, here's a quick summary. You have to prove beyond any reasonable doubt what's going on in the problem. The other thing that's really important to realize before we look at the problem we just did as a class is that this is absolutely not what you do in other question types. So you must separate the different question types in your head. So notice here's what we wrote about draw the conclusion on the last page. This is true for draw the conclusion, but it's absolutely not true for other question types. So, and if you apply it to other question types, you're going to get in really big trouble. In particular, if you try to apply this to strength and weaken type questions, which are the most common question type, you're going to be in very big trouble. Okay, back to the problem at hand, which is this one. Remember, you need to prove something beyond a reasonable doubt. So let's take a look. What can we prove beyond a reasonable doubt? And remember, when we're talking about proving things, if we want to prove something, then we are restricted to things that are within the existing scope of the argument. What the scope of the argument means is the set of topics that the argument is currently talking about. So, in other words, your conclusions or inferences must stay within the boundaries of the topics that currently exist in the passage. That's what scope means. So on these problems, you have to stay within the existing scope of the argument. Once again, it needs to be emphasized that this is absolutely not true for other question types. For instance, on strength and weaken, you have to be outside the scope of the argument. In fact, on strength and weaken and on explain the situation type problems, you absolutely have to be outside the scope, or your answer is wrong. But on these questions, you have to stay within the scope of the argument. So what's going on here is the scope of this argument is really not that big. But let's look at what topics are even in this argument in the first place. So in other words, what's the scope of the argument? In other words, i.e., what is the scope? So the scope of this argument, well, 30% of all merchandise orders placed by subscribers and under 35. So whether people are subscribers, whether people are under 35 or not, and merchandise orders. This is it. I mean, this is the entire scope of the passage. So anything that is not contained within these topics is incorrect. Because it's just a guess. Right? That's the point. Like, if you are not staying inside the scope of the passage on this question type, then it's wrong. So let's revisit our previous example. That's why A is incorrect. Like, the scope of the passage is just how many times has Smith been to the restaurant, how much money on average, and what kind of food. So likes and doesn't like is completely outside this scope. And premium, because we're just talking about an overall average, premium is also outside the scope. So you can eliminate, on this question type, you can eliminate things that are outside the scope of the passage. So let's take a look. The average dollar amount out of scope. Some of you picked this. This is incorrect because the passage never even talks about money. And also we have, oh, by the way, the scope is also just about last year. There's a question in the text box about which question types are out of scope. I don't want to go off topic at the moment, but if you look at other study halls that topic is treated, just go ahead and check out the other critical reasoning ones, and because you want to make sure you understand each individual question type anyway. So giving a list here is going to be sort of counterproductive until you've seen those different types of questions. So go ahead and check out the study halls regarding the other question types and make sure you understand why each one is which. Like if I give you a list, you'll just memorize it, that'll be bad. If you watch the other study halls, then you'll come to a deeper understanding of this. The passage also just talks about last year. Like, this year has absolutely nothing to do with the argument at all. Like, here's last year, and here's also last year. So, anything that talks about this year or now is out of scope. So that's this. And people who have never ordered merchandise, that's, again, more than just last year. So, also incorrect. Because, I mean, never ordered merchandise is widening the scope of the question to include any year in which anybody ever ordered anything. So, also not okay. So, what we're looking at is a choice between C and E. So let's pull this onto the next page, and let's kill the answers that are out of scope. So A is gone, and B is gone, and D is gone. Well, let's take a look. So 30% is a minority. Like, the point here is the contrast between this figure and this one. So let's take a look at that. This is a minority of 30% is less than half. A minority of subscribers' orders were placed by the under 35 set. But most of all of the orders were placed by the same type of people. So what you can prove here, in fact, it's not just beyond a reasonable doubt in this case. In fact, it's absolutely rigorously proven to be true. This is only 30%, yet you have to raise that overall average to over 50%. So the only way that this can be true is for is to have some huge number of non-subscribers to boost that figure. So there must have been a huge number of non-subscribers under 35 ordering items. So that's E. Any questions about this? Notice that you can actually prove that C is false. Like, if you most merchandise orders were placed by subscribers. Well, no, sorry, you can't prove that. But this could very well be false. Like what you can prove from this first paragraph is that 70% of the subscribers' orders were placed by people over 35. But that's just the subscribers' orders. And that's the problem. Were placed by people 35 or older. But that's not 70% of all the orders. And that's the problem with this answer choice. Because this is not just subscribers, this is most of the orders, and we don't know that. Like if you look at just the set of orders placed by people who subscribe to the magazine, then that's 70% of that smaller group. But if there are a huge number of non-subscribers, which in fact there have to be, then that could substantially lower that percentage overall. Okay, questions. If you have questions, please type them in the text box. If not, we will move on to another one. Okay, let's do a quick review of this, what we've learned. And again, on your own time, you should make sure that you can write your own problems like this. So quick review, inference, or draw conclusion. You should be able to, I think someone is pressing the hand button. Just go, if you have a question, go ahead and just type it in the text box. On an inference problem, you need to pick the answer choice that is proved beyond a reasonable doubt. And that means you need to stay in scope, i.e., you need to stay in scope of the passage. That means you have to, so in other words, instead of thinking outside the box, you have to think inside the box. You have to stay within the given topics. And that's pretty much a summary of this. So here you go. Prove beyond a reasonable doubt. Stay in scope. Someone named first session, you have some statements in there, but I'm not sure where you're going with that. So maybe you could explain a little bit what you're trying to say there. I'll wait for just a second. See if we can type that kind of fast. Answer choice E, they can be subscribers over the age of 35. Not sure where you're going with that. Maybe you can type a little bit more while we're looking at later items. Okay, let's look at another problem. That one. So please use the answer buttons. Remember, the answer buttons are located in the top left of your screen. And if you're here late, remember that this is the GMAT. The GMAT is a test on which you always have to answer every problem. So press the answer button. Okay, I'll give you a couple minutes. Go for it. Okay, there's still a lot of people without answers. Make sure that you answer the problem. Because again, this is the GMAT. this is a test where you are not allowed to not answer problems. So always answer everything. Okay, so a few of you, let's take a look. Let's downsize this guy a little bit. And okay. So again, you need to stay in the scope of what is given here and go from there. This problem, I don't think a lot of people found this to be that hard because the majority of you got it right. But let's look. So here's your class answers. So United Lumber will use trees from its forest for 2 products. The trunks will be used for lumber, and the branches will be converted into wood chips to make fiberboard. The cost of this conversion will be the same, whether it was done at the logging site or at United's factory. However, wood chips occupy less than half of the volume of the branches. So the tree trunks aren't really discussed much here. So this problem is basically, I mean, they do mention that one thing about the tree trunks, but this problem is basically a problem about converting the branches into wood chips. So the scope of the argument is the cost of the conversion is the same. So whether they do it at each site but the wood chips occupy less than half the volume. So what can we prove again? Like what is in scope and what can we prove beyond a reasonable doubt? Sometimes it's totally rigorous proof, but at other times it's not. At other times it's like courtroom proof, where you might have objections, but the objections are just sort of unreasonable. So let's take a look. What is in scope? Let's go there first. Well, let's see what things are not in scope. Transporting a fully assembled wood chipping machine, we have no idea, because the passage doesn't talk about how you would do it at the logging site. So, passage just doesn't talk about logistics. I mean, you don't really have to delve very far into this choice. Like, if you really wanted to start thinking about it, you could go into issues like, well, you know, what if they could, you know, transport the machine in different parts and then put it back together on site, whatever, but we don't care. I mean, the main point here is that this is just not in there at all, and so you don't need to be thinking about it. It would be more economical to debranch the trees at the factory. Cost is the same. So that's not supported. It's not out of scope, but it's not supported. Only stages in the processing of branches, and that would provide an economic advantage. Both of these are, the second one is not out of scope, but the first one's out of scope. I mean, we don't know if there are other stages. The passage doesn't say that these are the only parts of the process. So as far as we know, there might be 8 other parts of the process. We really have no idea. The transportation costs sounds like it might be out of scope, but notice how they qualify this. Transportation costs that are determined by volume. So if volume is in scope, then this is also in scope. Because, I mean, the transportation cost is trying to throw you off, but it says determined by volume. So volume is in the scope of the argument. So if anything is solely a function of volume, then that's in scope too. So watch it there. And then if you look at answer choice E, branches are only used for the production of wood chips. Well, you know, we don't know that. I mean, we know that this company does use branches to make wood chips, but we certainly don't have enough information to make a generalization as broad as that. I mean, we just know that this one company happens to use branches to do this one thing. That's definitely not enough evidence to make a conclusion about the entire industry. I mean, you know, choice E is very dangerous reasoning. Like choice E is the same kind of reasoning that that gives people ugly things like racism and prejudice and stuff like that. Because, you know, the reasoning of choice E is like, oh, look, this one person of race X did something bad to me. Therefore, everybody in race X is, you know, such a horrible person. I mean, it's really the same kind of thing. You know, just because United Lumber does something does not mean that the entire wood processing industry follows suit. And, you know, so if you did pick E, make sure you check yourself on that. Bad news. Okay, anyway, so the ones that are out of scope are A, C, E. Now, what can we prove beyond a reasonable doubt? Well, let's take a look. Well, more economical at the factory. If we look at choice B, versus costs would be lower at the site. So more economical means that it would cost less, is basically what it would mean. So if you look at choice B, according to the passage, is actually not true. Because the only cost they mention in the passage, at least it's probably false. At least there's no, false is the wrong word to use. There's no evidence for this. And the existing evidence is slightly against it. It's not false, necessarily. But there's no evidence because we have equal costs. And also there would be less volume to transport, so all things being equal, the passage actually weighs against this choice. Correct answer is D, because if the volume is lower, then so would these costs. Because if the costs are based on volume, then if the volume is lower, the costs are also lower. Give me a smiley face if this question is good. If you have any questions about it, go ahead and post them in the text box, please. And we can move on to something new. Okay, let's try this one. Yeah, no points for selecting E when you thought you selected D. That's true. Make sure you click the right answer. All right, go for it. Have fun. And we still have a few ladies and gentlemen here who are undecided. So remember, you got to answer the problem. GMAT is not a test on which you are allowed to not answer problems. So please pick something in the next few seconds. Okay, let's look at it. Looks like people had a much harder time with this one. Okay. Take a look. So what can we prove beyond a reasonable doubt? Okay, well, the scope of the passage, let's take a look at it. What is in scope? Well, the egg-laying habits, size of host egg, and if they laid too many eggs, then so number of eggs, like egg-laying habits, specifically number of eggs. Size of host egg, and the reasons why the number of eggs is important. And that's it. That's the entire scope of the passage. So that means that if you have anything that is outside the range of these topics, then it's incorrect. So choice B is way, way, way outside of scope. Because defenses against this form of predation is just totally not discussed. And again, 5 people picked that. And it's interesting to me that you would, because this type of thing is just not discussed anywhere in this passage. So if you're one of the people who picked that, then beware. You need to do a better job of noticing what stays in the scope of the passage and what doesn't. Parasitic wasps learn from experience. We don't know how they learn. So it's very possible that this is instinctive behavior. So again, very careful with this, but methods of learning are not in scope. The speed with which these things happen, again, not in the passage. Like basically laying too many eggs is bad, laying too few eggs is bad. They both kill the larvae, but we don't know which one kills the larvae faster than which other one does. So we don't have that. And then parasitic wasps use visual clues. We don't know that. We know that they have to somehow know how big the right host egg is. But we don't know that they do that by seeing the egg, which is what choice E is saying. I mean, they could do that by many other ways. It doesn't have to be visual inspection of the egg. So that means that the correct answer must be A, because everything else is out of scope. And we'll talk about why this is proved beyond reasonable doubt here in a second. But notice that on this problem type, it's very powerful to be able to eliminate things that are outside the scope, because on many of these problems, you will get items that are, you get 4 items that are outside the scope, which means only 1 is not. So as far as choice A goes, the size of the smallest egg that it could theoretically parasitize could be determined from its behavior. Well, it's exactly the right numbers for any suitable size of host egg. So that means that there is like some smallest egg. Because there's going to be some size of egg where your suitable number is 1. And then below that number, your suitable size is going to be 0 eggs, and that means it's too small. So, because in other words, what the passage is saying is that you have some sort of perfect correlation between egg number and host egg size. So you just have to watch the behavior of the insect and just see where that is going to go to 0. And then you won't be able to parasitize anything smaller than that. So, but the easier way to tackle this one is, again, to just have a very, very strict point of view on the scope of the argument and stick with it. Think inside the box. So not very many problem types afford you this kind of opportunity. But when you do draw the conclusions, this is what you got to do. The other 4 things are basically just made up completely out of nowhere. Whereas this one is amply supported. Any questions about this problem? Go ahead and post the questions in the text box. Otherwise, we will move on to other things. Okay, no questions. Let's take a look at this one. How about 18? It's right here. Okay, same deal. Please use the answer buttons. Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, please pick some type of answer to this thing. See, there's a few of you who don't have answer choices yet. So, okay, looks like we are basically there. So let's talk about it. Just a moment, sorry. Okay. If you are one of the individuals who still hasn't answered yet, there's a Chase, there's a Hema, there's a Pradeep number 2. Remember, you got to answer the questions. It's the GMAT. You're not allowed to not answer problems on the GMAT. So, okay, let's talk about it. What is in scope, what is not? Remember, the questions to ask yourself about this problem type are, what is in scope and what can be proved beyond a reasonable doubt? So let's look at the scope. Well, the scope of this passage is really not much. I mean, the first statement is just kind of a weird generality. It's not really telling us anything. So the only thing in here that's really a fact is that coal output per miner is twice as much as it was 5 years ago, even though there are not any new mines. So this is it. So now notice some people, I'm going to take away the Blackboard functionality because some people are messing with stuff, it looks like. Okay. No new mines, but the coal output per miner is twice as much as it used to be. So let's take a look at these choices. Notice when they give you an if statement, those don't have to be in the existing scope because those are hypotheticals. So if when you see if blah 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 blah, then blah 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 blah, the if hypothetical does not have to be in scope because they're just positing that. But given that hypothetical, you still have to be able to prove the rest of the conclusion from what you have. So the if part is like additional information. But so, yeah. The problem with B is that it's talking about individual coal mines, and this is Tribnia as a whole. So same thing, if any individual coal mine has not increased its output, then its overall output has declined. Well, we don't know that because you can't generalize. I mean, one very common wrong answer type, which we see in B and D, but also in lots of different problems, is trying to go from an overall observation to an individual component observation, or vice versa. I mean, you can't do this, right? Like, if you have an overall, like, think about people, it might be more obvious. Like, if I tell you overall that, like, Germans are taller than Filipinos, that doesn't mean that every single German is taller than any given Filipino. It's not true. Also, if you have a really tall Filipino and a really short German, individuals, you can't generalize and say that Filipinos are taller. So, Stephen, our answer is that break whole groups into smaller parts always wrong. I mean, if you have enough extra assurances, they could be right. Like if you say, you know, all aliens, like all Martians are the same height and all, you know, Venus aliens are the same height also. Then if you have one Martian who's taller than one alien from Venus, then all of them are taller. But you would have to have enough statements in there for you to prove that. Also, make sure you don't try to think in terms of rules anyway. Make sure you think in terms of understanding. Like the day that you think about critical reasoning in terms of rules is the day that you die. Like it doesn't work. So make sure that you think more in terms of understanding the problem. Okay. But we don't know anything about individual coal mines. I mean, these are overall observations. You can definitely have different variations within the individual mines that would cancel each other out. Okay. Cost is out of scope. Like, we don't know anything about cost. So any answer choice that discusses cost is incorrect. And then choice E, or choice C, if any new coal mines had opened in Tribnia. I mean, there's two things wrong with choice C. The first is that, I'm going to go ahead and put this on another page. See. Okay. Remember that you have to prove things beyond a reasonable doubt. There are two things that are very wrong with choice C here. The first is that we're trying to predict what would have happened with new mines. First is, we think we know what would have happened to the new mines that theoretically would have opened. So that's bad, right? I mean, it's a total theoretical. Like, we have absolutely no evidence for anything that theoretically would have happened with our new mines. But also, and perhaps more importantly, it's per miner. It's not total output. So it's not, because like if you open a new mine, you can pretty reliably know that the overall output as a total is going to be more. But more coal doesn't necessarily mean more coal per miner. Same thing with miles versus miles per hour. Like, if I drive 1,000 miles and then I walk like 10 miles, then the 10 miles that I walk will definitely increase my total mileage, but they will not increase miles per hour because it's much slower than driving. So, even if you had a mine that opened and produced a whole bunch of coal, it could still lower the coal output per miner if it wasn't as efficient as other mines. So choice C, I wouldn't necessarily say it's out of scope, but it's just not right, given what we have here. I mean, it's making assumptions that we can't make. Versus choice A, if you set the number of miners to be the same, then the coal production must have doubled. Well, because, coal, the idea is that amount of coal per number of miners now is 2 times amount of coal over number of miners from 5 years ago. I mean, ordinarily, this would allow variation in either one of these quantities. You could have different amounts of coal, or the coal might have gone up by 6 times and the miners up by 3 times. That would work. Or the coal might have stayed the same and the miners might have been cut in half. Or who knows. But choice A is saying that that number of miners is constant. And so if that's true, then you can cancel it in your mathematical reasoning because it's the same. And so that proves A. And A is another example of something that is not only beyond a reasonable doubt, but in fact must be true. Like, A absolutely is a mathematical certainty. Any other questions about this problem? If you have questions, please post them in the text box. Otherwise, we will move on to something new and exciting and different. Okay. Go for this one. Okay, there's still a lot of blanks. Spend 2 minutes. Remember that critical reasonings, you should do them about in proportion to how long they are. So the length of a CR should be roughly proportional to how long you spend on it. This should be, yeah, okay. These problems were transcribed by students on forums and made into a document. So this is, this should be a 2 here. Let me give you guys an extra minute in case you need it. So that should be 2. Thank you, Stephen. Yes, that should say 2. So take an extra minute, minute and a half if you need it. That's going to nullify my previous comment anyway, but the length of a CR should be roughly proportional to how long you take to solve it. So I'll give you a new minute and a half here. But it shouldn't take you 2 minutes to solve something that's this long. All right, go for it. If you want to change your answer, go ahead and change your answer. Okay. Let's take a look. If you are Satish or Hema, then please pick a choice. Remember that. This is a test on which you have to answer the problems. You don't have the option to not answer things. So make sure you answer the problems. Okay. Here are the class statistics. So it looks like you guys are divided between B, C, and D. So last week, no shipments of building supplies were sent out on Friday. The 5 specially ordered shipments were sent out on Thursday. And each of those specially ordered shipments consisted entirely of building supplies. 4 shipments were sent to Truax last week, none of which consisted of building supplies. Okay, which of the following must also be true? So notice the following. Notice what's in this passage and notice what isn't. Okay, because a week is not just Thursday and Friday. So I know that sounds kind of obvious when I put it in those words, but there are definitely other days in the week that are not Thursday and Friday. So here's what's going on. A week has, Monday, well, let's just say other days. Thursday,